Lord Jesus, we thank you for the week we've had so far, the lessons that have been involved. We pray that in this Bible introduction class we come to know your word through the wisdom that you have given us. Amen.
Amen. We're looking at the book of Exodus, as you may or may not remember. And we are looking at the main themes of the book. At the end of last lesson, I spent some time emphasising how important in the Old Testament the revelation of God's name is, his proper name. That's absolutely central, because by God giving his proper name, he gives access to himself and all his blessings. The name in the Old Testament takes the place of an idol in pagan religions. Idols give you access to a god, the face of a god. Idols are forbidden. The reason they're forbidden is because God gives his personal name. And with the gift of his personal name, the holy name, worship becomes possible. God can introduce himself by name, saying, I am the Lord, and giving himself to his people, committing himself to his people, and the people can access God in prayer. Let's just look at two additional passages which deal with God's revelation of his holy name to Israel. We had a look at chapter 3, 13 to 15. Tony, can you go to chapter 6, 2 to 8 of Exodus? Here God speaks at some length about his name and the use of his name.
Chapter 6 to 8.
6, 2 to 8.
God also said to Moses, I am the Lord.
Just stop there. I am the Lord. Now, how does that function? Scholars call this the formula of self-introduction. If I come up to you and say, I am John, what am I doing?
Introducing yourself.
Yeah, I'm introducing myself and giving you permission to do what? To call me John. If I say, I'm Pastor Kleinig, and I give you limited access to myself, but by saying I'm John, I'm giving you full personal access to myself. I'm introducing myself to you and giving you permission to use my name. Keep going. Tony?
I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob as God Almighty. But by my name, the Lord, I did not make myself known to them. I also established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan, where they lived as aliens. Moreover, I have heard the groaning of the Israelites, whom the Egyptians are enslaving, and I have remembered my covenant. Therefore say to the Israelites, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. I will free you from being slaves to them, and I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with mighty acts of judgment. I will take you with my own people, and I will be your God. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God, who brought you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. And I will bring you to the land I swore with uplifted hand, to give to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. I will give it to you as a possession. I am the Lord.
Notice the formula, I am the Lord, comes three times here. The first time God introduces himself to Moses, I am the Lord. And then he says, speak to the people and say, I am the Lord. Can you see what's funny about that? Moses is speaking to the people as if he is God. So God introduces himself and gives his name to his people through Moses. And after Moses comes the priests. They introduce God and give people access to God, name God. And that, notice how the name God here, the name Yahweh, is connected with his covenant with Abraham and his acts of redemption. He promises then to redeem them and to save them. Yes, David?
Oh, no, yeah, I was just going to say, where it says Lord, it was saying Yahweh.
It's Yahweh, yes.
Yeah.
If I can give you the full story, it's Yahweh, which then is in Hebrew is unpointed and is read as Adonai in the synagogue, which is Lord in Kyrios in Greek and Lord in English. Right, so there's a whole story there, but a very, very important part of Christian theology and a very important part of the Old Testament. So God introduces himself by name, and by giving them his personal name, he gives them access to his grace. He gives them access to the gift of redemption. So grace, redemption. So they know him as Redeemer through his holy name. But the same God who makes himself known to the Israelites as a Redeemer makes himself known to the Egyptians as Judge. So there's always those two sides to God and his power. Let's have a look at two passages there. The Egyptians' knowledge of God, knowing God and his power. Chapter 5, verse 2. Who's next? Garth, and you can then read 9:13 to 15.
Pharaoh said, "Who is the Lord, that I should obey him and let Israel go? I did not know the Lord. I will not let the Israelites go."
Now notice just a little bit before that, Moses and Aaron come to Pharaoh and say, "This is what the Lord, Yahweh, the God of Israel, says. Let my people go." Pharaoh says, "I don't know the Lord. Why should I let his people go?" Now, when Pharaoh says, "I don't know the Lord," it doesn't mean this. What does he mean?
The name.
Well, he might even know the name. But what sense is know here?
Personal.
What?
Doesn't have access to him.
Yeah, that's over-interpreting here. Think here, who is Pharaoh? He's the incarnation of the Sun God. Who is Yahweh?
He doesn't have a personal relationship with him.
Well, not only personal relationship.
He doesn't have a relationship at all.
Forget that's over. He just doesn't acknowledge him. He's a tin pot nothing. Why should he take any notice of the Lord? It's like me going to Mr. Rudd and saying, I want you to do this. What's he going to say? I don't know you. Rack off. Who are you? That's the idea. He doesn't acknowledge God. He doesn't know God in that sense. Doesn't acknowledge him as his superior, as God. Okay. At the end of the plagues, what does Pharaoh have to acknowledge? His God. Okay, can you read that then? Chapter, where am I? 9:13 to 16.
Then the Lord said to Moses, "Get up early in the morning, come to Pharaoh and say to him, 'This is what the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, say. Let my people go, so that they may worship me. All this time I will send the full force of my plagues against you, and against your officials and your people, so you may know that there is no one like me in the earth.'" 16.
Yeah, all the way through 16.
"For by now I could have stretched out my hand and struck you and your people with a plague that would have wiped you off the earth. But I have raised you up for this very purpose, that I might show you my power, and that my name might be proclaimed in all the earth."
Right? What God forces Pharaoh and his officials to do is to know that there is no one like him in all the earth. To acknowledge that he is superior. But they don't know his grace. They don't know his blessings. What do they know? His power. And they have to acknowledge his power. So God's revelation of himself, showing himself, is always ambiguous. To some it is in grace and deliverance, others it is in judgment, power and judgment. Now that leads me to the next theme. Some of you are learning Hebrew. The most important word in the book of Exodus is the Hebrew verb avav, which means to work, serve, perform service. but it can also be to be a slave. The noun from it, avodah, can mean either work or service, but it can also be slavery, bondage. Can I give you the pun, the wordplay around which the whole book's theology is constructed? God delivers the Israelites from avodah, meaning slavery, bondage, service, so that they can serve him. Or put it another way, God delivers the Israelites from serving Pharaoh and the Egyptian gods as slaves, so that they can serve him how? In worship. Now, the word that's translated rather crudely in the NIV as worship is in fact serve. And from this we get the very important term service and divine service, which means something a little bit different to worship. Right? So God delivers the Israelites from slavery to divine service. Let's have a look at that theme. Have you got it in your head? Okay, let's look at the passage. Who's next? Yes, Frank. Chapter 3, where am I? No, chapter 1, 13 to 14. Chapter 1, 13 to 14, that's the negative side.
All right, go.
We'll begin at verse 12 to 14 because I'm in the middle there.
But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread. So the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites and worked them ruthlessly.
Made them serve ruthlessly, that verb.
They made their lives bitter with hard labour, in brick and mortar, and with all kinds of work in the fields. In all their hard labour, the Egyptians used them ruthlessly.
Hard labour, guess what the word is? This word here, avodah, service, bondage. So they are slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt. They have to serve him. They have no freedom to do so. Now, what's the purpose of the Exodus? Why does God deliver his people? Can you go to chapter, 3 verse 12. Right at the beginning. 3 verse 12, please. Can you read that too, Miguel? 3 verse 12, if you don't mind.
And God said, I will be with you, and this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain.
No, you will do what? You will serve God on this mountain. So I can't go into the whole thing about the sign, but it's a future sign. The sign that God is with his people is the fact that they will serve God. And where will they serve God? At Mount Sinai. And what kind of service will they do? They will perform divine service. They will, the word we use is worship God. We'll have a closer look to see what that involves. So they will serve God. Now, so then when Moses goes to Pharaoh, what does he demand Pharaoh to do? Can we go to chapter 5 verse 1? And can you read that too?
Certainly. Afterwards Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and said, This is what the Lord, the God of Israel says, Let my people go, so that they may hold a festival to me in the desert.
Right, to hold a festival. That has a very exact sense here. There's two things that are involved. That they hold a festival is a pilgrim festival. So you go on a journey in order to feast.
In the desert.
In the desert. Now how do they feast? They eat meat, holy meat, as God's guests. So holding a festival is coming into God's presence as his guests to eat and drink holy food, holy drink. So how do they serve God? By feasting. That's the basic ambit claim. Can you go to 7 verse 16, which is the beginning then of the demand that runs every time he comes to Pharaoh? This is what Moses says. 7 verse 16. Could you read that too?
Certainly. Then say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has sent me to say to you, let my people go, so that they may worship or serve me in the desert.
Righto. Worship me in the desert. The Hebrew is serve me in the desert.
But until now...
That'll do.
Okay.
So what's the purpose of the Exodus? They are to leave their service of Pharaoh and the Egyptian gods so that they can serve the true God. How do they serve the true God? By feasting, by being his guests, eating at his table.
That sounds alright.
Yeah, okay, everything's turned on its head here. So how do they serve God? By God serving them. And this is specified quite clearly in connection with the Feast of the Passover. That service begins already in Egypt. Because as you probably know, the Feast of the Passover celebrates the deliverance from Egypt. And the focus of that feast is eating meat. Eating the meat from a lamb that's been sacrificed. Let's have a look at the main part of this, and particularly some of the important features of this. Who is next? David, I think. Can we go to chapter, first of all, 12, verse 14, and then 21 to 27. The whole of chapter 12 has to do with the Passover.
This is the day you are to commemorate. For the generations to come, you shall celebrate it as a festival to the Lord, a lasting ordinance.
Why do you celebrate it? See the word festival again? You go on a journey from your home, you go to journey to a holy place in order to eat a meal in the presence of God. And this is a lasting ordinance. Just skip the rest and then go back down to verse 21 to 27 of chapter 12.
Same chapter?
Same chapter, sorry.
Then Moses summoned all the elders of Israel and said to them, go at once and select the animals for your families and slaughter the Passover lamb. Take a bunch of hyssop, dip it into the blood in the basin, and put some of the blood on the top and on both sides of the doorframe. Not one of you shall go out the door of his house until morning. When the Lord goes through the land to strike down the Egyptians, he will see the blood on the top and sides of the doorframe, and will pass over that doorframe, and he will not permit the destroyer to enter your houses and strike you down. Obey these instructions as a lasting ordinance for you and your descendants. When you enter the land that the Lord will give you as he promised, observe this ceremony.
Just stop there. This ceremony is in Hebrew this service. So the service is a ceremony. So ceremony, service. Keep going. And notice how this word comes up again. The word in Hebrew is service.
And when your children ask you, what does this ceremony mean to you? Then tell them it is the Passover sacrifice to the Lord, who passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt and spared our homes when he struck down the Egyptians. Then the people bowed down and worshipped. The Israelites did just what the Lord commanded Moses and Aaron.
Now, what's the main part of the Passover service? Number one, they are to slaughter a lamb, and the blood is to be put on the doorposts of the houses. It protects them from the angel of death. It keeps them safe. And it creates a clean, holy place, a shrine in the land of Egypt. And then in that house, for the Passover evening, the whole family eats the meat from the Passover lamb. And they drink wine and have some bread and herbs too. But the main focus is on eating meat, holy meat, from the Passover lamb. And this is the service that God says. And when the kids say, what's the point of this service? Say, this service commemorates the deliverance of God from Egypt. He spared us then, he spares us now. As he delivered us then, he delivers us now. So, divine service. God rescues his people. in order that they may serve him. Now, there's two parts to this service. There is the Passover feast, which is on the evening of a week, is on the 14th of the spring equinox, the liturgical beginning of the year for Jews. Now, that evening meal is followed by the 7 days of unleavened bread, in which the Israelites are not to eat bread with any leaven in. The first and the last day are the important days of this. Can we just go to chapter 13, verse 3 and 4, which refers to this and its significance. Could you read, please, Levi?
Then Moses said to the people, "Commemorate this day, the day you came out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery, because the Lord brought you out of it with a mighty hand. Eat nothing containing yeast. Today, in the month of Abib, you are leaving."
Now, to leave, word in Hebrew is yatzah, to go out. Have you had it yet? Probably not. And from which you get the word Exodus, going out. But it has a double meaning in Hebrew. It means to go out, but it means to go out on a journey, secondly. And thirdly, it means to go free. If you're a slave, yatzah means to go free. So you go out and you go free. Now, I will have a little bit more to say on this, but I need to cover some other things. Any questions on what we've done this far? Yes?
They eat meat normally?
Sorry?
But we eat meat normally.
Yeah, and yes, thank you for raising that, Levi. You need to know that until modern times, people ate meat very rarely. And still, in most parts of the world, people eat meat only on special occasions, festivals. So, for example, if you followed our ancestors back to Europe, they would have eaten meat only at Christmas and Easter, birthdays and weddings, occasions like that. Very rarely do you eat meat. It's only wealthy people who eat meat every day in the ancient world. So the Israelites would eat meat at the festivals. Otherwise, animals are too precious to eat. I have a letter of one of my ancestors who came out from Eastern Europe to Australia. At the end of his life, he wrote back to his family and told them, about how well he'd done for himself. He was a peasant, landless peasant back in Eastern Europe, and he had a farm, and he did very well for himself, at least as he thought it. And he found it very difficult to tell the people back home what things were like here in Australia, because everything was on a big scale. He said how many cows he had, how many sheep he has, how many bags of wheat he harvested. But this didn't mean anything much, because nobody knew the value of these. And he said at the end of it, here in Australia we eat meat, guess what? Every day. No? Astonishing. Yes. You eat meat only on festivals, holy days. And in ancient Israel, you eat meat only as part of sacrifices. That was the normal thing. So it's you can eat it otherwise, but that's the normal thing.
So were they allowed to? Were the Israelites allowed to have sacrifices, celebrate festival days and stuff like that?
Of course they celebrate the festival days. The question is whether they can eat meat outside the festival days. Yes, you can look at the book of Deuteronomy, the book you're looking at, chapter 12, where you get what you do when you eat meat, secular meat.
Festivals, but you can eat it
elsewhere. Yep. At a holy meat. Now take notice of the connection, the lead from that to what for us? Jesus and Holy Communion. Right? Oh, there's a direct line there, which will become clear as we go. Now, what's most significant theologically is that in the book of Exodus, we're told about how God makes his covenant as the holy God, the Lord, God who is the Lord, God Yahweh, let me use that term, makes his covenant with Israel Israel is already his people, but in this covenant, he promises to make them a holy nation. And this is a two-sided covenant, whereas the one with Abraham was one-sided. This is two-sided. Now, what's God's side of the covenant, and then what's the people's side of the covenant? Can we go first to chapter 19, 4 to 6, and then 22 and 24. 19, 4 to 6. Very important passage, this. Okay, Frank. Josh, sorry. Oh, yes. Yes. Not sure. I'll do this again and again. Yes. Josh, I've got to... Yep.
You have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings, and brought you to myself. Now therefore, if you obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession out of all the peoples. Indeed, the whole earth is mine, but you shall be for me a priestly kingdom and a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the Israelites.
So, now, here God is putting a proposal to the people. He says, I want to make a covenant with you. Now, if you keep this covenant, what will you be? A holy people. God's treasured possession. God takes Israel out of all the nations and he makes them a holy people, but it's also holy priesthood. A royal priesthood. God, who is king, appoints Israel as his priest. Now, what is a priest? A priest is a mediator. They have access to God, so they can approach God in worship to receive blessing, and they can bring those blessings not only for themselves, but they bring those blessings to the nations. So Israel is to be his holy priesthood. That's what God offers to them, make them. And then that's what the covenant's all about. Them being his holy people. And what does he do then? His side of the covenant? Stephen, yes. Chapter 20, verses 1 and 2.
And God spoke all these words. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery.
Now, remember, it's Mount Sinai. He's speaking to the whole nation out of the cloud. This is the only time they hear the voice of God. And what is the first thing that they hear? They don't see God. They hear God say, I am Yahweh. So he introduces himself by name. And he does what? I am Yahweh, your God. He commits himself to them. So he gives them his name, number one, and he gives them his commitment to them. Notice how this comes first. We would expect it to be the other way around. God coming to his people and saying, look, you commit yourselves to me and then I will be your God. But God commits himself to his people, gives them his name. Now, with that commitment is fleshed out later on by him giving them the tabernacle, the priesthood, and the divine service, the daily service at the tabernacle every morning and evening. That's his side of the covenant. So he gives them his name, and then he commits himself, not generally vaguely, just verbally, but practically, by giving them a place where they can meet him, access him, priests who can represent them, him and them, and the divine service by which they can get to approach him and receive his gifts. That's his side of the covenant. Now, the people's side of the covenant are the 10 Commandments, which follow. Now, don't get it wrong. God doesn't say, look, keep the commandments and you will be a holy people. How does it work? You are a holy people, therefore, keep the commandments. So the 10 Commandments don't have to do with ethical living, moral living, but with holy living. They touch on those things which defile the Israelites, make them unclean, and desecrate their holiness. Hence the importance of the first 3 commandments. You shall have no other gods before me. Why? Because God is the source of their holiness. He is their only God. They are not to take the name of the Lord in vain. That's the holy name by which they access God, and that name makes and keeps them holy. They are to keep the holy day holy, the Sabbath day holy, etc. And even the second table of the law, which deal with their relationships with each other, deal with their relationships to each other not just as people who belong to the same community, but people who belong to holy community. They are holy brothers, holy sisters. They are part of a holy community. Excuse me. So God, the people's side of the covenant, the 10 Commandments, and the altar for sacrifices as the place where the altar is the place from now on where God will meet with his people and the people will meet with God. Can we go to the very important law of the altar, which is sort of tagged on here and seems to be out of place? Chelsea, could you read chapter 20, verse 22 to 24 will do.
And the Lord said to Moses, "Thus you shall say to the people of Israel, you have seen for yourselves that I have talked with you from heaven. You shall not make gods of silver to be with men, nor shall you make for yourselves gods of gold. An altar of earth you shall make for me and sacrifice on it your burnt offerings and your peace offerings, your sheep and your oxen. In every place where I cause my name to be remembered, I will come to you and bless you."
Notice the connection between a number of things here. First of all, God speaking to his people from heaven. Since God speaks, they are not to make an idol. Secondly, the emphasis on the altar as the place where God speaks to his people on earth and meets with his people on earth. And thirdly, notice the emphasis there on God's name. Wherever God causes his name to be remembered in the Hebrews, there he will come and bless them. Now that has two sides to it. Wherever God reveals himself by name, and wherever God's name is therefore remembered and used and invoked, there God comes and meets with his people. And for what purpose does he meet with his people? In order to bless them. Can you see things are put on their head? Instead of worshipping people serving God, God comes through the daily sacrifices to bless his people. God's covenant with his people therefore has to do with and focuses on the divine service. God's commitment of himself to his people and access to himself through his name, through the tabernacle, through the divine service, and the people living as holy people and keeping the 10 Commandments. Ultimately, what God gives his people is his glory. What's God's glory?
Isn't it his revealed self?
His revealed self, that's very abstract. It's more concrete. That's right. His presence. And his gracious presence. So God's glory is his hidden, gracious, accessible, available presence. And where is that given to them? At the tabernacle. Right? So it is, God makes himself accessible, available here on earth. They don't have to go up to heaven. God comes down to them here on earth. Now, in keeping with that, two things follow. First of all, at Mount Sinai, Israel, which up to this point had been God's people, now becomes something new, different. They become God's holy people. They are consecrated, made holy by God himself. You remember God's promise? He said, if you keep my commandment, then what will you be? No, in my covenant, you will be my holy priestly people. Now, where and how are they consecrated? Take notice of this. It's a very, very important incident, which is very often misinterpreted. Can you go to chapter 24, 3 to 8? Now, to understand this, sorry Adele, you need to envisage the scene. You have Mount Sinai, that's a very crude representation of it. You have an altar here at the bottom of the mountain, and you have the people here. The mountain is divided into two parts. There's the top part where God's glory is, and then there's the cloud-covered part of the mountain, and that's fenced off to stop anybody whom God doesn't invite up here from coming onto the holy mountain. Now, this is an incident which occurs at the bottom of the mountain around the altar. Whose turn next? Karen, can you read, please? Chapter 24, 3 to 8.
When the Moses went and told the people all the Lord's words and laws, they responded with one voice, everything the Lord has said, we will do. Moses then wrote down everything the Lord had said. He got up early the next morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain and set up the 12 stone pillars, representing the 12 tribes of Israel. Then he sent young Israelites men, and they had offered burnt offerings and sacrificed the young bulls of fellowship offerings to the Lord. Moses took half of the blood and put it in bowls, and the other half of the sprinkled on the altar. Then he took the book of the covenant and read it to the people. They responded, we will do everything the Lord has said. We will obey. Moses then took the blood, sprinkled it on the people and said, this is the blood of the covenant that the Lord has made with you in accordance with all these words.
This is a remarkable incident, something that happened only once here and never again. Get the basic picture? Moses builds an altar, and he gets his assistants to sacrifice animals on the altar, or for the altar, and then he does something rather strange. He takes the blood from the animals, part of it is sprinkled, splashed against the altar, and if it's splashed against the altar, what does the blood become? Holy. In fact, it becomes most holy. Most holy means that it can make things holy. So the first part, the blood becomes most holy, and then what does Moses do? Sprinkles on the people. What's the point of that? Can you work out?
Yeah, to make them whole.
To make them holy. So they become God's holy people. And notice the word that he uses to announce this. This is the blood of the covenant. Does that ring any bells for you?
Yes.
Yeah, where does it? Holy Communion. Jesus says this is the blood of the new covenant, or shed for you for the forgiveness of sins. Now, here in the Old Testament, the blood is sprinkled on people's bodies. What do we do with the blood in the New Testament?
Drink it.
We drink it, so it's sprinkled not on our bodies, but on our hearts, our conscience, to cleanse us and to do what to us? To make us and keep us holy. So Israel is sanctified in this ceremony. That's number one. But God doesn't just sanctify them once. He shares his holiness with them every time they come to participate in the divine service, which is every morning, every evening. Now let's have a look at the divine service. But before we do that, let's have a look at the tabernacle and its significance. Remember, the tabernacle is that tent, the place where God lives with his people. Who's next? Adele, could you read chapter 25, verse 8, which stands at the beginning of the instruction of God to Moses to make a tabernacle. Tabernacle means tent, by the way.
Then have them make a sanctuary for me, and I will dwell among them.
Well, to notice there's two words there that are important. Make a sanctuary for me. What does sanctuary mean?
It's somewhere you can go and be safe.
It's a safe place, but it also, why is it a safe place? Sanctuary means quite literally holy place, a sacred place. So it is a sacred place, and it is a safe place, a place of refuge. It's what makes the tabernacle holy?
God's presence.
God's presence there makes it holy. And second, and that's emphasized there, have them make a sanctuary for me so that I may dwell among them. Dwell here, reside. So in God who lives in heaven comes to dwell, reside, take residence with his people in this place so that these people can meet with him. Now, and he meets with his people at set times and set places. Let's have a look at one of the most important passages in the Old Testament, which gives us the theology of worship in the Old Testament. If you want to understand what the significance of worship is, what happens in worship, this is the passage. And it is of great importance too for Christian teaching on worship. Miguel, can you read this? Back to you again, chapter 29, 42 to 46. 29, 42 to 46. Look, we better get the context of it, going back to 38.
38?
38, yes.
This is what you are to offer on the altar regularly each day. 2 lambs a year old. Offer one in the morning and the other at twilight. With the first lamb, offer a tenth of
ephah
of fine flour mixed with a quarter of hin of oil. Quarter of a hin of oil from pressed olives and a quarter of a hin of wine as a drink offering. Sacrifice the other lamb at twilight with the same grain offering and its drink offering as in the morning, a pleasing aroma, an offering made to the Lord by fire. For the generations to come, this burnt offering is to be made regularly at the entrance to the tent of meeting before the Lord.
Just pause there. So every morning, every evening, a lamb is to be offered to God on the altar. Every morning, every evening, and together with that you offer flour, which is mixed with olive oil and incense, and wine is poured on the altar. So meat and wine and flour, the basic food stuff. Now on the face of it, this looks as if they are to provide a meal for whom? God.
He's got good taste.
He's got good taste, yes. Best wine and best olive oil and good meat, young lamb. But now look at the way it's turned upside down in what follows. It looks like a meal for God, but what happens? Keep going.
There I will meet you and speak to you. There also I will meet with the Israelites, and the place will be consecrated by my glory. So I will consecrate the tent of meeting and the altar, and will consecrate Aaron and his sons to serve me as priests. Then I will dwell among the Israelites and be their God. They will know that I am the Lord their God, who brought them out of Egypt, so that I might dwell among them. I am the Lord their God.
Okay, what's the purpose of the daily sacrifice? Number one, the daily sacrifice, the daily divine service, the purpose of it is for God to meet with his people. So he comes from the Holy of Holies and meets with his people at the altar. Secondly, God meets with his people in order to speak to them. I can't go into the Hebrew there, but the speaking is to you, singular, namely Moses first, and then to the high priest, Aaron, and the priests. So God speaks to his people through the priests. And you need to see the most important thing that God speaks is the Aaronic benediction. So he speaks blessing to his people. Number one, he meets with his people. Number two, he speaks through the priests to his people in order to bless them. Number three, God's glory is present, and God's glory has what effect on the tabernacle, the priests, the people? It makes them holy. Again and again. God's presence sanctifies the tabernacle. If God is not present, then the tabernacle becomes just an ordinary tent. If God isn't present, then the priests are just secular people. If God isn't present, the Israelites cease to be holy. So he meets with his people in order to speak to them, and speaking to them, he blesses them by his presence with them and makes them holy and keeps them holy. And the whole place, the whole priesthood is made holy. Number four, the purpose of the daily sacrifice is so that God can dwell with his people, and so that they can know him. They can experience him, get to know him in a personal way. Notice last of all that this gives the purpose of the Exodus. Why did God deliver the Israelites from Egypt?
They couldn't do this there.
No, go to the text.
So they could serve and worship.
No. What does it say here? Can you read verse 46 again?
46. They will know that I am the Lord their God, who brought them out of Egypt, so that I may dwell among them.
Right. Why does God rescue his people? So that he will dwell among them, join them where they are. They don't go up to heaven. He comes down to earth, lives with them, dwells with them, and gives them all these gifts. There's something which isn't added here, but is added later on in the sacrifices, which is that God, this meal, what looks like a meal for God, in fact is a holy meal that God provides for the priests and the people on the pilgrim festivals. All the lamb is burnt, so God doesn't eat it, it's just removed. Some of the flour is burnt, but what happens to the rest of the flour? The priests on duty make it into flatbread, and that's their daily rations when they serve God at the temple. It's most holy food, the food that makes them holy. And when people come and bring their offerings to God, only a small part of the animal is burnt on the altar. The rest of it is eaten by the people.
In the presence of God.
In the presence of God. And if part of the animal is burnt on the altar, placed on the altar, what does it make the rest of the animal?
Most holy.
Most holy.
What happens to the most important wine?
Ah, yes. That's drunk too. Some of it. There's different uses of wine. But do you remember there's reference in the book of Deuteronomy to the Israelites coming in one place and eating and drinking in God's presence, or eating and rejoicing. Now the rejoicing is always connected not just with the feasting but also the drinking of holy wine. The holy wine as God's guests.
How would they have got the wine in the desert?
Sorry?
How would they have got the wine in the desert? They would have...
Trading, very little of it, and this is the daily sacrifice, and it's a little amounts really. But the people's sacrifices, where you need large pies, they only begin when they get in the land.
Okay.
Because the wine that they offer is the wine that they grow on their vineyards. The meat that they eat is the meat from their flocks. The flour and bread that they eat comes from the grain that they grow on their land. Right? That's the deal. So they take the produce, their agricultural produce, and they bring part of that produce to God, and paradoxically God gives it back to them so that they can feast, eat and drink in his presence. That's the deal in worship. Let's take a break and then we will wrap up the book of Exodus and begin Leviticus.